Good afternoon to our valued SEIPI members and business partners. In partnership with SEIPI, welcome to the Meralco webinar on the impact of the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, or CREATE Act, on the value-added tax in Meralco bills. This is a webinar for our customers who are subjected to VAT-Zero Rating. I am Ken Itliong, a relationship manager of the Corporate Business Group of Meralco. With me is my co-host today, Mr. Arnold de Guzman.
Thanks, Ken. Good afternoon to everyone present in today's webinar. I am Arnold de Guzman, the lead of the Electronics and Automotive team of Corporate Business Group. We are glad to have you all here today so we can help you answer questions and concerns you may have about our topic, such as, first, what is CREATE law? Second, what are the changes on the imposition of VAT? And lastly, what are the new requirements needed to be VAT-Zero certified?
We just have some reminders for our customers joining us today. We would like to inform everyone that this meeting will be recorded for data keeping, data quality assurance, and for learning purposes related to the subject matter to be discussed. Throughout this webinar, feel free to type your questions and comments on the chat box. We encourage you to identify yourself so we can acknowledge you properly. After our speaker presents, we will then proceed with the Q&A session, wherein we will try our best to answer all of your questions. Please be reminded to avoid posting personal details such as your service ID numbers, address, or mobile numbers in the chat. And lastly, please ensure that you are streaming this webinar from a comfortable and cool area that has strong Wi-Fi connection to ensure sound and visuals are crisp and clear. If the broadcast is a bit blurry from your end, we hope you can move to a place wherein your internet connection is stronger. Before we start the presentation, before we start the presentation of our speaker, to capture this moment, we'd like to ask everyone to turn on your cameras and smile for our group photo. Yeah. Okay. I'll just tap. Hello, everyone. Please turn on your cameras, please. Okay. All right. So on cue, everyone smile. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. So thank you everyone for your cooperation, and you may now switch off your cameras for better internet bandwidth. So we will be sharing our group photo later after this engagement.
Thank you, Ken. Moving along with our program, let us all welcome the head of Meralco's Tax Advisory Group, Mr. Nico Miguel Angsico, for the discussion of the VAT-Zero Rating.
Thanks for the warm welcome. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so let me know if you can already see the screen. Anyone?
Yes.
We can see your PowerPoint presentation, Sir Nico.
How about now?
Yes, actually, we can view it on it's not on the presenter's view.
The presenter's view. Okay, wait, let me try that again.
All right, sir. Yes, we can now see your presentation.
Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Nico Angsico, And this afternoon, we'll be discussing the impact of CREATE, particularly the provisions amending the VAT-Zero Rating provisions. I mean, the amendments to the VAT-Zero Rating provisions as brought about by CREATE, its implementing rules and regulations, and the related BIR issuances. Okay, so we have a short agenda this afternoon. We'll be discussing the scope, the scope of this discussion, a bit of a background. Then we'll jump on to the conditions for VAT-Zero Rating. This will be the conditions which we will follow to accord you VAT-Zero Rating on your Meralco bills. And finally, we will be recapping the new process and the requirements. So the requirements are very important because these will be the documents we would be needing from you. All right. So let's go on to the scope and background first. So to begin, we have here a slide which is an oversimplified slide on the impact of CREATE. So it's a comparison of the pre-CREATE rules and the CREATE rules from Meralco's perspective. So again, this is not an exclusive list. This is just to emphasize the point that we just want to emphasize we just want to isolate the discussion this afternoon as it pertains these to number one only, to the first type of customer. So under pre-create, on the left side, we have here the tax treatment under pre-create, and on the right side, we have here the tax treatment under create. So for IPA registered entities, these are the entities which are registered with eco zones or free port zones, such as Philippine Economic Zone Authority, Subic Bay Metropolitan Authority, Clark Development Corporation. Under pre-create, we treat our sales to these entities as 0% VAT following the cross-border doctrine. So the only requirement under pre-create is that we get a VAT-Zero Rating certification from the IPA for us to accord VAT-Zero Rating. So this is one type of customer, and this will be the type which we will cover in our discussion this afternoon. The second type are the customer group which enjoys VAT exemption by virtue of special laws or international agreements, such as ADB, World Health Organization, International Rice Research Institute, your embassies, and renewable energy developers. So this under pre-create, they can be subject to 0% VAT in accordance with the special laws or international agreements. So there are different set of rules. Jumping on to create for customer group number 2, this we would want to highlight that this is not affected by create. So this is not the coverage of our discussion this afternoon. So going back to number 1, or the IPA registered entities. So under create, it will be further subdivided in domestic market enterprises and registered export enterprises. For domestic market enterprises, these are now subject to 12% VAT. So effectively, they are no longer entitled to VAT-Zero Rating on their local purchases. On the other hand, for registered export enterprise, they will be subject to 0% VAT, but subject to certain conditions. And those conditions we will discuss in detail in slides. So again, this slide is an oversimplified version on what qualifies for VAT-Zero Rating, and I would want to highlight that the discussion this afternoon would only be focused on the first row, or the IPA registered entities. Okay. So let's go on first to the definitions. So what is a registered business enterprise? So a registered business enterprise is a company, a partnership, or an individual which is registered with an IPA, such as Board of Investments, Philippine Economic Zone Authority, Bases Conversion Development Authority, Clark Development Corporation, Subic Bay Metropolitan Authority, Tourism, Infrastructure, and Enterprise Zone Authority, Zamboanga City Special Economic Zone Authority, Cagayan Economic Zone Authority, and so on and so forth. So basically, those are the eco zones, your eco zones and free port zones, which are currently existing. It also says in the create that there may be additional IPAs in the future, and the governing rules will still be create for those IPAs. For a registered business enterprise, it is also clarified that it excludes service enterprises such as your customs brokerage, trucking or forwarding services, janitorial and security services, insurance and banking, consumers co-op, retail, restaurants, and other similar services. So this is the definition of a registered business enterprise under CREATE. So the more important definition would be this slide or the registered export enterprise. So as provided in CREATE, a registered export enterprise must be IPA registered. So it must be registered in any of the investment promotion agencies listed in the slide, on the slide. And the second condition is that it must be engaged in export activities such as manufacturing, assembling, processing, IT services, BPO services, and other services, which result in direct exportation or a sale to another registered export enterprise, wherein it will form part of the final product. So again, so this is the definition of a registered export enterprise. It is IPA registered and it must be engaged in export activities. So if you would recall in the previous slide or in our scoping slide, for registered export enterprises, they are still entitled to VAT-Zero rating on their local purchases. It's just that there are certain conditions that need to be met. Okay, and then finally, another important definition would be for domestic market enterprises. So this was defined under CREATE in the negative. So it says there that any enterprise, any IPA registered enterprise which is not considered an export enterprise is considered a domestic market enterprise. So if you would recall, for domestic market enterprises, they are no longer entitled to VAT-Zero rating on their local purchases. So they are effectively subject to 12% VAT on their purchases. Okay, now we got the definitions out of the way. This slide just briefly discusses the timeline of the relevant tax issuances. So as you may know, in January 2018, TRAIN, or the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion Act, was enacted into law. So this is the first package of the tax reform under our current administration. So as you may know, in TRAIN, the major development there was that the transactions which are pre-train, there is a list of transactions which are subject to 0% VAT. Under TRAIN, it qualified which transactions are VAT-Zero rated. So some transactions are zero rated but subject to certain conditions. And also in TRAIN, if you would recall, our legislators tried to add a provision saying that sales to entities in a separate customs territory or in tourism eco zones are considered subject to 0% VAT. But that specific provision was vetoed by the president with the explanation that it would want to limit the VAT-Zero rating to direct exporters. But even with the presidential veto, I hope you would recall, it didn't have an effect on IPA registered enterprises because even without the provision saying that separate entities in separate customs territory and tourism eco zones are zero rated, you would recall that they already enjoy VAT-Zero rating. So somehow from January 2018, we observed status quo such that if you provide VAT-Zero rating certification from your IPAs, we can already accord VAT-Zero rating. But come April 2021, CREATE was enacted, and our tax code was amended to include a provision saying that sales to registered business enterprises may be subject to 0% VAT, but now subject to conditions. And with the interpretation of the BIR and the DOF, come June 2021, the CREATE IRR, or the Implementing Rules and Regulations, was released, saying that only registered export enterprise may be subject to 0% VAT, subject to additional conditions. So somehow, the definition or the entities which can qualify for VAT-Zero rating was narrowed down because of the CREATE IRR, because it was just limited to registered export enterprises. Also in June 2021, the BIR took a stab at it. They issued Revenue Regulation number 9-2021 and a related tax advisory. This was a quite contentious issuance because it says there that suppliers of registered business enterprises can no longer apply for VAT-Zero rating. So what is the effect? The effect is that the sales to registered business enterprises are subject to 12% VAT without qualification. So there is no longer VAT-Zero rating. Of course, this contentious revenue regulation was disputed, and the IPAs and IPA registrants lobbied against it. And I suppose they were successful because in July 2021, RR 15-2021 was issued, which basically suspends and defers RR 9-2021 until such time an amendatory revenue regulation is issued. And that amendatory revenue regulation was issued in December 2021, okay, through RR number 21-21. And in this revenue regulation, the BIR basically posits that sales to REEs, or your registered export enterprises, may be subject to 0% VAT, subject to additional conditions. And finally, there's clarity by March 2022, saying in RMC 24-2022, BIR issued this particular issuance saying that, or it clarifies issues on the applicable rules, the effectivity, transitory provisions, and it imposed an additional provision or additional requirement that the sellers must apply for VAT-Zero rating on behalf of their suppliers. So the message of this slide is that we traveled a long way, and in the past year, there has been a lot of changes, and what we will discuss is where we are right now. In the following slide, we are now going to our second agenda, which is the conditions for VAT-Zero rating. Okay. So in our reading of the CREATE Implementing Rules and Regulations, RR number 21-21 and RMC 24-2022, there are 4 conditions to qualify for VAT-Zero rating. The first condition is that the customer must be a registered export enterprise. Okay, so we have already tackled the definition of a registered export enterprise in the preceding slides. The second condition is that the entitlement must be within the sunset provisions. So what are these sunset provisions? So we will discuss it in the succeeding slides. So previously, prior to CREATE, for example, the 5% gross income tax incentive, there is no sunset provision. It's granted effectively, it's perpetually granted effectively. But with CREATE, certain conditions are revisited, and there are now certain incentives were revisited, and there are now sunset provisions for these incentives. The third condition is that the purchase of the registered export enterprise must be directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. So we'll tackle that in the succeeding slides. And lastly, the VAT-Zero rating must be endorsed by the investment promotion agency, and an application for VAT-Zero rating must be approved by the BIR. So these are the 4 conditions for us to accord VAT-Zero rating. Okay. Now, we are going directly to the second condition, since we already discussed the first condition, which is an entity must be a registered export enterprise. So the second condition is on the sunset provisions. So as provided in CREATE, the VAT-Zero rating entitlement is no longer perpetual. In CREATE, there are 2 sunset provisions, and you would have to know whether the activity is a new registered activity, that is, it is registered during CREATE, in which case the sunset provision would be a maximum of 7 years from the registration with the IPA. which means the entity can enjoy VAT-Zero rating for a maximum of 17 years from the registration with the IPA. The second sunset provision relates to existing registered activities. For existing registered activities, they can continue to avail of the VAT-Zero rating, but it will expire along with the transition period provided in CREATE. So what is this transition period? So the transition period would depend on what pre-CREATE incentives were provided to the registered export enterprise. If the registered export enterprise was only accorded income tax holiday, for example, income tax holiday for 4 years, beginning, let's say, March 2018, the transitory period would run until the expiration of income tax holiday. So in our example, it will only run until March 2022. Okay, so that those apply for this applies to an activity which enjoys income tax holiday. For activities which enjoy income tax holiday and 5% GIT after the income tax holiday expires, or for activities which purely enjoy 5% gross income tax, the transition period would be 10 years from CREATE. So CREATE was enacted April 11, 2021. So the 10-year period would be until April 10, 2031. So these are the sunset provisions, and I suppose your IPAs are well aware of this, and they might not give you VAT-Zero rating certification if you failed to meet this sunset provisions, or if you are not within the sunset provisions. So this is the second condition. The third condition is that the purchase of the registered export enterprise must be directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. So in CREATE IRR, direct and exclusive use was somehow defined to pertain to raw materials, inventories, supplies, equipment, goods, packaging materials, services, utilities, which are directly attributable to the registered project or activity, without which the registered project or activity cannot be carried out. So that's the definition in the CREATE IRR. But it is also further defined in RMC 24-2022. So in the screen, you will see here the salient points in RMC 24-2022 as it relates to the definition of direct and exclusive use. So it says here that only portion of the expense directly and exclusively used by the REE can qualify for VAT-Zero rating, and it excludes those used for admin purposes. So this means that, for example, if your energy consumption, electricity consumption, is both used in a registered project or activity and for admin purposes, only the portion pertaining to the registered project or activity can qualify for VAT-Zero rating. The REE should adopt a method to best allocate. So BIR gave an example. For utilities, it can use separate power meters for its registered project or activity, or it can adopt any method that may determine the allocation. So it provided further examples, such as based on the area usage or the ratio of utility expenses between cost of sales and admin expenses as reflected in the prior year AFS. So again, these are not mandatory. You can come up with your own allocation basis as long as you find it the most reasonable allocation. And we only lifted this from the RMC. These are examples coming from the BIR itself. If the goods and services are used both in registered project or activity and for admin purposes, and you cannot come up with a proper allocation, the purchase shall be subject to 12% VAT. So it seems that by default, the purchase is subject to 12% VAT unless it can be argued that it is directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. And finally, there's a note there that services for admin purposes, such as legal, accounting, and such other similar services, are not considered expenses directly attributable to the registered or activity. So this is the third condition. And And I suppose this is one of the conditions which made it difficult for the BIR to come up with clarificatory issuances. And finally, in RMC 24-22, one Q&A there asked that is prior approval from BIR needed by the local supplier of goods or services for sales to be accorded VAT-Zero rating under CREATE? So what are the requirements? So the BIR responded in this RMC that prior approval is required, and the application for VAT-Zero rating is necessary and shall be governed by RMO number 7-06. So it says there that the application should include your BIR certificate of registration, your IPA certificate of registration, the VAT certification from the IPA. There should also be a sworn affidavit coming from the REE buyer that goods or services are directly and exclusively used in the production of goods and of services to be exported, and for utilities and similar costs, the percentage of allocation to direct and exclusive use. Okay, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and the fifth document which would be required from the REE would be other documents to prove existence and legitimacy of the transactions, such as certified true copies of your purchase order, job order, or service agreement, sales invoices, and ORs. Okay, so this is the fourth requirement which must be complied with so that we can accord VAT-Zero rating. So more on the application for VAT-Zero rating. In terms of processing of applications for VAT-Zero rating, so here are the relevant points. The seller, so in our case, if you are our customer, it would be Meralco. Meralco would be the one to lodge an application with the BIR. Based on our informal inquiry with the BIR, the processing time would be 5 to 6 days. But again, this is only an informal inquiry with the BIR. So you would ask, when is the effectivity if prior approval is required? So the approval of the BIR takes effect on the date of receipt of the application by the BIR until the end of the year. So for example, you submit to us the documents, we review the documents. Let's say on June 1, we applied for VAT-Zero rating. So the approval, assuming that the BIR approves on, let's say on June 7, the effectivity of VAT-Zero rating would retroact from the time of application with the BIR, which is June 1. And there's also a note there saying that you have to do this every year. So the renewal of application shall be done on or before the last day of each year. So I guess the reasoning for this is that so that you will enjoy a full year of VAT-Zero rating come next year. So for example, in 2023. So everything should be lodged on or before December 31 of this year. So those are the 4 conditions for VAT-Zero rating. And we are now moving on to of course, the new process and the requirements. So we'll go first to the requirements. So again, to recap, we would be needing, for us to accord VAT-Zero rating, we would be needing the BIR certificate of registration, the IPA certificate of registration, and the IPA VAT certification. So these 3 documents are all, I suppose these are documents we already have on hand. And it is not vendor specific. It applies to all your vendors. So I don't think there will be a problem in securing these documents. I would just want to highlight that for the IPA VAT certification, there is a template required by the BIR, and it's provided in RMC 36-2022. So this is the template. I'm showing the template. So this certification is to certify that the company is a qualified export enterprise for VAT purposes as it pertains to purchases from local suppliers of goods and services directly and exclusively used in the registered export project or activity. So this will be valid for a specific year, okay, and it will be certified by the IPA. So for example, it will be certified by PEZA. Okay. And then there is an annex to this VAT certification. So the Annex A would just list down your registered activities, the original project, new project, expansion project, amendments, if any, the tax incentives, entitlement, whether you are entitled to income tax holiday, corporate income tax, or growth income tax, duty exemption, VAT exemption and zero rating, and some terms and conditions with regard your performance, compliances, and export ratio. So it also indicates here the validity period. Okay, so this is the VAT zero rating certificate. So this is a new version, and actually there are two versions. One version which applies to new activities, which mean activities which are registered during create, and another version pertaining to existing activities, which means activities which were registered prior to create. So actually the contents are the same. So I'll not go through the contents anymore. So these are the required VAT certifications of the BIR. So we've tackled 3 documentary requirements. The fourth requirement would be a sworn affidavit executed by the customer. So we have a suggested template here. So there is no required format for the sworn affidavit, but we took the liberty of drafting one just to assist you. So our proposed sworn affidavit would certify that the company is registered with an IPA, the specific registration number, the date of issuance as an export enterprise and then you have to specify your business activities or projects. It would also certify that the provision of energy by Meralco is directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity following the provisions of CREATE, and that the most important part here would be your declaration of the basis of allocation and the percentage of the energy provision by Meralco that is directly and exclusively used for the production of goods and or completion of services to be exported. And finally, just to be consistent with the definition of direct and exclusive use in the CREATE IRR, there is a notation here that without the provision of energy by Meralco, the registered project or activity cannot be carried out. So this is again just a proposed template. You can use a template which you find more suitable. Okay, so this is a sworn affidavit. And going back to the requirements, so unlike the first 3, so the sworn affidavit would be, of course, vendor specific because you would be declaring there the percentage of your purchase, which is directly and exclusively used in a registered project or activity. And lastly, we would need documents to prove existence or legitimacy of the transaction, such as certified true copies of the billings, ORs, or service agreements. So all these documents will be coming from the customer, and this will form part of the application for VAT-Zero rating of Meralco. So these would all be submitted to the BIR. So just to recap the process. So we have here a comparison of the existing and new process for those invoking VAT-Zero rating. Under the existing process, the customer submits the IPA VAT-Zero rating certification. Meralco tags the service as VAT-Zero rated, and eventually Meralco applies 0% VAT on the bills. Under the new process, the customer submits the complete documentary requirements, as I've shown in the previous slide. Meralco submits the documents and applies for VAT-Zero rating with the BIR. Upon BIR approval, Meralco tags the service as VAT-Zero rated. And finally, Meralco applies 0% VAT on the bills. So you may be asking, where do I submit the documents? So in the next slide, I have here the document submission channels for biz customers and corporate customers. So you need to submit the soft copies on or before May 31. So it may be sent ahead to the following email address. So VAT-Zero Rating@meralco.com.ph. You also need to submit the hard copies on or before May 31 because some of the documents cannot be soft copies, such as your sworn affidavit and the certified true copy of the other documents proving legitimacy and existence of the transaction. So these need to be submitted to the following addresses. So BIS Partners Group, 10th floor Lopez Building, Meralco Center, Ortigas Ave, Pasig City. For corporate business group, 10th floor Lopez Building, Meralco Center, Ortigas Avenue, Pasig City. So for inquiries on the submission and follow-ups, you may reach us at for biz customers, the hotline 16210, or you can email us at biz@meralco.com.ph. You may also contact your biz partner manager. For corporate customers, you may contact your relationship manager. And just an FYI, we target to file for application for VAT-Zero Rating come June 2022. So we would appreciate if you can submit the documents ahead of time. So actually, this is my last slide. I am turning you over to Arnold for the continuation of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Nico. Again, for our viewers, feel free to type your questions or comments in the chat box. We encourage you to identify yourself so we can acknowledge you properly. At this point, we will now proceed with the Q&A portion. So allow me to call our panelists. We have our speaker, Mr. Nico Angsico, Mr. Jerry Esperidion, the head of Meralco's Tax, Realty, and Contract Management, Mr. Arnold de Guzman, the lead of Electronics and Automotive Team of the Corporate Partners Private Sector Relationship Management Group, Mr. Anderson Ongsiping, Officer of Operations Management of the Competitive Market Group. Let us now address the comments and questions of our attendees. Well,
Ken, while waiting for the questions from our audience, maybe I'll start it na. So my question is to Nico. My question is, a portion of our electricity supply is directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity, while another portion is used for administrative purposes. How will you compute how much will be subjected to 0% and 12% VAT?
Okay. So basically we would rely on the sworn affidavit that you will be providing because you will be required to indicate there the percentage of your consumption which is directly and exclusively used in the project or activity. So that will be the basis of the computation of the portion of the bill which will be subject to 0% VAT. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Sir Nico. So we encourage everyone to take this opportunity to ask away while our subject matter experts are present. Thank you.
For me, Sir Nico and Sir Jerry, maybe I'll ask a question on behalf of some of our customers. Um, they have they already have their 2022 zero VAT certificate issued already by PEZA. So how will this affect their certification? Will there be is it still valid, or should they apply for a or submit another set of documents for this application? Sir Nico or Sir Jerry?
Okay, I take the question.
Please.
Well, first, Hello and good afternoon to everyone. Well, yes, understand the IPA or specifically PESA has already issued the VAT certification as it is annually being done, right? But uh, but since the BIR has issued an RMC where they prescribe templates for the certification, so well, it implies that the BIR would be expecting that the IPAs of PESA would use or would follow the prescribed templates. Okay, but um, we're trying actually to ask the BIR on that respect, no, whether they would still accept the certification that has already been issued by uh, by the IPAs. No? But for me, I would advise that the templates be followed or be observed rather than because what we what we fear is when we file the application and if it's not the prescribed certification that is being attached, BIR may deny or return the application. So we're conscious of the time. We would rather have the approval as early as possible so we can implement the VAT-Zero Rating. Thank you. I hope that
Thank, th-
somehow clarified.
Thank you, Sir Jerry. We do have a question here from uh, Sir Ramil Soriano. So his question is, what if we cannot meet the submission to Meralco deadline on May 31? Um, yes, sir.
Yeah, if I
Yes,
may
Sir Jerry.
answer. Uh, where we set actually we have to file the application as early as possible. Now, the May 31 deadline that we set is just to accommodate our customers to prepare the required documents and submit to the Meralco. So we really, uh, in fact, if we can have a sizable submissions from the customer, even before May 31, we will be filing it because we aim to really get the approval as early as possible. Now, if for some reason some customers may not be able to submit the documents to Meralco on May 31, well, it will affect the the reckoning date of the batch zero rating. So because the as as indicated in the issuances of the BIR, the effectivity date of batch zero rating application would be the application date. So well, following the regulations before the date of filing, there is the great possibility that 12% VAT will be applied.
Copy, sir. I hope Sir Ramil Soriano got that answer, address his, I mean, his question. So I think we do have another question from Chukiden. I think this is Miss Irene. So the question is, we are engaged in leasing activities as an ecozone facility, as this enterprise. How can our locator tenants who are our REEs avail of the VAT on the Meralco bill that is under our company name, not not directly to the REEs? I mean, I think this is it's the name of the bill is under the owner and not on the user. I think it's that's the concern.
If I can answer the question, Ken.
Yes, Sir
I
Arnold.
think the first process here is to apply for transfer of service so that the name of the account of the Meralco can be transferred to the registered REE, so that they can avail of the perks of the VAT-Zero rating. So thank you. And if there are queries or clarification on how to the documents for the transfer of service, they can reach out to you can reach out to your relationship manager, Miss Irene. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Arnold. Another question from Miss Charlene Contreras. Is it required or optional to all PEZA registered companies to submit the said documents to Meralco? She's from a manufacturing company.
Okay, I'll take this question.
Okay,
So
Sir Nico.
as you may recall, if the IPA registered entity is a domestic market enterprise, meaning it is not engaged in export activities, it is no longer entitled to VAT-Zero rating. So for DMEs, you do not need to submit the documents. Uh, you 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 are not, since you are no longer entitled to VAT-Zero rating. But of course, for REEs, if you would want to invoke your VAT-Zero rating, you have to submit the documents for us to duly lodge an application with the BIR. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you also, Miss Charlene, for that question. Sir Nico, thank you. Some of our customers here or here in our webinar are on the contestable market group. Maybe we can how will they process? I think because of that, Meralco is not billing them. So what if they have RESs or the RES are billing them? What are the procedures maybe? Is it the same or is it similar to what Meralco is doing? Um, Maybe Sir Andy can share a bit of the that on when it comes to the Arcoa side.
Good afternoon, everyone. For actually, just probably just as a brief background, we already actually mentioned the same information for those retail suppliers or renewable energy suppliers. In that, our take on the matter is that these retail suppliers will be billed with VAT moving forward, especially because of the create law. So I think at the moment it is best that you would coordinate with your retail supplier, especially since in our current setup, we are the ones who build the retail supplier. And as far as we're concerned, it is passed through, or at least your charges are passed through.
If I may add, Ken, um, with respect to the on who will file the application for the contestables, since the RES or the RESs are the suppliers of the contestable, so the RESs will file the application with the BIR, not Meralco.
Got that,
Thank
sir.
you.
Yes, thank you, Sir Jerry, Sir Andy. I hope our clients here take note of that and for it's not Meralco who's filing when it comes to the Arcoa or the RES billing. Another question from Lean Cruz. Do we need to apply if we are already zero rated? I think this was answered earlier by Sir Jerry. Um, for our viewers, you may take this opportunity while our speakers and panelists are here. This is a case in which I think there is a deadline, and we should follow the rules on these updated guidelines as well. So if you have questions on regarding the topic, you may type in your questions here, or maybe later on you can directly communicate with your relationship managers. So we do have base partners, and we do have the corporate business group relationship management assigned to you. And so right now, maybe we can explain on, yes, Sir Arnold.
Maybe I have another question. This is for Sir Jerry. So for the appreciation of everyone. So my question is, what if the application of VAT-Zero Rating is not approved by BIR? What will happen? Thank you.
Okay. Um, Meralco will advise our customers either the application is approved, and if not approved, or there's questions or additional requirements that being asked by the BIR, we shall promptly advise, inform the customer. We will be monitoring the application once we submit to the BIR, especially if there's a denial or additional requirement. We shall promptly inform, notify our customers.
Thank you very much, Sir Jerry.
Okay. For now, I think that's all our questions received from our audience. Yes, done. So, Sir Jerry, Sir Nico, Sir Andy, and Sir Arnold, we would like to thank you for your time in joining this webinar, short webinar. So, we would also like to thank our attendees on this webinar, and we hope that we were able to clarify some of your concerns, maybe not not all, but almost all of the questions. So if you have questions that we were not able to address, or maybe for concerns that are account specific, you may contact your Meralco relationship manager for clarifications. As shared earlier in the slide, you do have these relationship managers and the corporate business relationship managers. Okay. Thank you, Sir Jerry, Sir Nico.
Yep. Welcome, and thank you to our
Welcome.
attendees.
Yes.
Okay, thank you
Thank
again,
you.
SEIPI members. And we officially conclude this afternoon's webinar. Hope to see you again on our future engagements.
If you have further questions, we encourage you to again contact your Meralco relationship manager, Biz, and the CBG, so we can be of help. Again, I am Ken Itliong, and my partner, Arnold de Guzman. Good afternoon, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll share the
Thank you.
recording and the presentation to our CP partners, so they'll be the one to send it to you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.